and welcome to County Board Wrap-Up, Arlington's review of the key actions the County Board takes at its monthly meeting. I'm your host, Kara O'Donnell, and as we continue to take those precautions during the coronavirus pandemic, Wrap-Up is again going virtual this month. With us today is Board Chair Libby Garvey, as well as Board Member Takis Karantonis. Thank you both for joining us. Now, the board's October meeting came during a very busy fall, with the county obviously still dealing with the global coronavirus pandemic that has touched just about every aspect of our lives, as well as launching efforts to reform policing and begin a community-wide dialogue on race and equity. We're going to tackle those issues and a lot more today. But first, we're going to start with an issue that's really kind of come to the surface even more as a result of the pandemic, and that's childcare. Nationwide, there have been a lot of concerns about the pandemic's impact on childcare and worries that many of the facilities will not be able to survive this time of shutdowns. What are we seeing here in Arlington, and what measures are being taken?
So at the moment, Kara, we are seeing we've got a number of childcare offerings that are actually getting expanded, which I'll talk about, and we approved some of that in our meeting. You're absolutely right that this is an issue that has come so much to the fore now with the pandemic. I think every mother that's tried to have a job and have children at the same time knows this is a really big problem. But the other half of the gender and people that maybe haven't had to deal with that are suddenly discovering, oh yeah, I guess this is maybe a problem. And it really is. I mean, we are seeing more women having to drop out of the workforce because they need to be watching their children. And of course, the fact that our schools are closed right now, they're working virtually, but the children are at home, just makes it all harder. So we are doing what we can, and we are seeing the benefits, I think, of the childcare initiative that Katie Crystal launched when she was chair 2 years ago now. And we have been continuing to try and expand childcare opportunities. I mean, two of the major things we did was a use permit amendment. You do have to, there are all kinds of, use permits and regulations to make sure the childcare is safe, and that's important to do. But we approved a permit amendment for the YMCA Child Care Center in Westover Baptist Church. And that was a before and after school care. But now they're going to be offering it during the day. So they will be providing a safe space for students who are distance learning during the pandemic. And their new operating hours are going to be from 7 in the morning till 6:30 at the night, Monday through Friday, which it's only 20 children. But that's for those 20 children and their families, that's a big deal. And then even more help was offered when we approved also a use permit amendment for Aspire. And they operate out of Arlington Mill Community Center on Columbia Pike. They have also had an after-school program, and that has converted to a full-day program. And this is for up to, it has been for up to 100 children, and now it's going to be up to 120 children. And they will, again, provide a safe space all day for students grades 3 to 5. Who were distance learning during the COVID pandemic. So and we also approved a number of other childcare permits that, people trying to increase their their capacity, and also continuing to operate. So we are really doing as much as we can, and I'd like to give a little plug for our daycare hotline for people who are listening. I mean, I know so many families are struggling with this, and it's not like we have enough for everybody, but there is a lot of information on our online directory. There's a directory of licensed daycare centers and family child care providers, and I'll just make sure I get the number right. You can also call our office, 703-228-1685. And it's 703-228-1685. So you can go online or call that number if you need help for childcare. And I've been talking a lot, but I'm a grandmother. I feel like I've been dealing with childcare for a very long time. But Takis, you might have a few words to say, because I know you've been really active with Aspire and the community center.
And it was really refreshing to see how many individual homes have been approved for up to 12 kids each one. I'm of course, and we are all conscientious. We are cognizant about the fact that the majority of these individual homes are really catering to households that have the economic ability to pay for this. However, they aspire. The kids with the Aspire program and the YMCA program, these are really kids that come from the most challenged families right now. in their vast majority, they're kids of from households where their parents are essential workers. So this is a continuous focus for the Arlington County Board. And I have to say, in addition, both in the case of Aspire and the YMCA, the accommodation included really expanding the space and making a lot of effort from these both very valuable nonprofit organizations that will be providing this service in an ongoing base.
Yep, there's a lot of work to do, and I will say we have been working with a couple of community centers and getting them ready to have childcare if that works out. Our problem so far, Cara, has been just the employees to staff them, because you have to have trained folks. So, we have been talking with our school system and others, and if we can find a way to find folks that are certified to work with young people, we do have some more space to use. So, I'd like to think this is a crisis and we're going to be through it soon, but I think we're in a chronic situation here. I think this has been going on for a while. So we'll be continuing to work on this.
Yeah, and maybe also a plug for, these are two nonprofits that are based in Arlington, have been working in Arlington for a very long time. They're part of our social safety net of nonprofit organizations. As everybody knows, nonprofit organizations depend also on donations and support, philanthropic support. So Aspire, After School Learning, and the YMCA that works for us here in Arlington. Thank you.
Yeah.
And of course, we mentioned earlier that it's been a struggle, not only for the families, but for the child care facilities themselves to stay open through this entire pandemic. And it's at a time when their services are more critically needed than ever. Have you heard from other child care facilities who are interested in expanding the hours? You mentioned the two, that have expanded already. Have you heard from the others that there's interest in expanding hours at other facilities as well?
Some, not so much. They're not so many. They're just before and after. So obviously anybody listening to this, if they are interested, please come to us, and we're absolutely willing to work with them. But and we're willing to do whatever we can. But not that I've heard. Our child care offers may have, and maybe Takas has, but not that I've heard from.
There is constant interest. The problem is that, operating a facility like that needs a lot of dedications, backup resources, what happened, contingency plans, etc. This is not a very straightforward under the current conditions. And in order to have a safe environment, both for the kids as well for the personnel, there are a lot of moving parts that have to align here. And this is not an easy, it's definitely a very difficult endeavor every single time. So, but we are keeping our focus, laser sharp on bringing about more resources that will help, and a workforce that increasingly, hopefully, will be returning to work and therefore will be needing the support of the daycare services.
Yeah. And doing what we can to support the school system to help them get kids back as quickly as possible.
I think that will be
that's the
key metric as we move forward through all of this.
Yeah.
Well, turning to another pretty hot topic, and that is race and equity that has dominated news cycles lately. The county has announced a new effort to address racial equity and disparity in the community. What can you tell us about this venture?
I'll turn it over to you in a minute, Takas, but people are thinking this is new. In a way, it's new, but you remember Christian Dorsey, who was our chair last year, brought forward as his focus area equity, and we adopted an equity resolution. And we have actually been setting out fulfilling all of the items that we said we were going to do with that equity resolution. So this particular step is a new step, but the whole effort is not new at all. We began in last year, particularly focusing on our organization with the Government Alliance for Race and Equity. That's through the Council of Governments. Actually, all of the surrounding jurisdictions have been sort of focusing on that with their employees. And that has really taken off. That for a while was really getting started when the pandemic hit. But I will say that helped give a foundation for, one of the things that obviously tripped this for everybody nationwide was the horrible murder of George Floyd. And and the upset and the concern and just a sense that we've got to fix this, and which is great. So one of the things that we have just launched, as you mentioned, was a dialogues, and that's an effort to bring the community together and have conversations, and not just. One of the things about racial discussions, particularly, they can be difficult. So you tend to talk with people who think like you do. You don't tend to get into a situation where you're really talking with people who come from a different place. Sometimes when that happens, people just yell at each other, and that's not helpful. So we're working to try and help the whole community have these conversations and get it up to a certain level where then we can really start to examine these issues and deal with it. I say we're trying to move from systemic racism to systemic equity as a county and as a government. And so, Takas, I'm sorry, I'll turn it over to you.
Oh, absolutely. It is absolutely true that Arlington County, under the leadership of Christian Dorsey, adopted this resolution. This resolution came already after a very deep and profound dialogue about the systemic, the structural issues and liabilities we have in this field, in lack of equity and of what kind of impacts racism, institutionalized systemic racism has had in all parts of Arlington's life, from zoning issues, housing issues, employment issues, wealth differences, health differences. We see that all percolating right now during the COVID, in this COVID summer. The pandemic has really revealed a lot of things, a lot of disparities that we already knew about, and of course the precipitating factor of George Floyd's murder in Minneapolis and several other episodes we had this year, and the ongoing Black Lives Matter protests, and that puts us in a position where everybody can engage and should engage. So the dialogues are one of many areas where citizens can engage. Actually, we are recording that today, which is the 22nd of October, Thursday. I believe the first one is already offered in October, 24th, this Saturday. So we warmly approach everybody to go online, the Arlington County website. They will see that pretty fast where it is and sign on to participate in these dialogues. In addition, I have to say there are all other. We have been, every single board meeting that I have participated, all three of them have been dealing with this issue. The issue is not only pro forma present in our action, is actually substantially present in every single board meeting, and I believe in everyday life, in government's everyday life. This is important to know and important to take into account. We have talked about the symbols and the logo of Arlington County, the desire to retire that. We've talked about the names of certain streets, of certain places, public places. All this is right now subject to these dialogues, and this is the first point of engagement for citizens coming up.
Yep, and you weren't there in January, but I know obviously I carried forward that same focus area for the board this year, and I had three, equity, innovation, and resilience, and little did I know that's kind of basically all we're doing. That's all we've been doing.
A little bit of foreshadowing.
Yeah, a little bit. But I will add
our partner in this, the challenging racism. You
exactly.
Say something about that.
I was going to talk about that. Yeah.
Can I just these dialogues? Now, do we expect these dialogues to eventually lead to actionable items? And then on a related note, how do these discussions, these dialogues, mesh with the county's review of police policies? Is that a kind of a parallel street?
It's all coming together, and it's all getting people kind of on a level set on the language we use and what we talk about, and it's kind of being able to understand each other's perspectives. Challenging Racism is a local nonprofit that has been doing this for, I think, at least 20 years. I mean, I worked with them when I was on the school board, and my focus on the school board was equity and education. That was the one area you didn't mention, Takas, but it really permeates everything we do. And they will be coming up with the Challenging Racism folks. We're having the conversations with citizens. Then we're going to move to groups, and they're going to develop a toolbox for these conversations that you can kind of, anybody who wants to have a conversation like this can take it. So we have similar questions to ask and a similar way to move forward. As I said at the outset, I think we all know this is a difficult issue, and people can use a little support in how to handle it and have these conversations. So they're developing a toolbox from these conversations. We're going to be working with larger groups and then getting on and continuing it and having those larger groups span out themselves and sort of train the trainer kind of idea. We got a good partner with Amazon. Amazon is helping to fund this. They are also participating. Now that was kind of part of the deal. When we talked to them, we would love to have you join us, but we really want you to participate as well. Finally, I want to mention the questionnaire that we've got, and that is online too. And we really encourage people to take this questionnaire. We're trying to get a baseline sense of where people are. And as I've said, I mean, people listening, there may be some people who just think systemic racism. What is that? Racism, that's not a big problem here, not in Arlington. That's fine. We want to hear from you because we want to get the gamut of ideas. And then one more thing, when we adopted that resolution, there were 4 questions. So for anything that we do, you should ask these questions. One is who benefits? The next one is who's burdened by this decision? The next one is who's missing? And how do we know? And Samia Bird, our new chief racism equity officer, which is she came out of that resolution as well. She added another question, a 5th question, which is what did we do? So in answering that question, Cara, we have plans on what we're going to do, but we're going to make sure and hold ourselves accountable because we've got to be able to answer that question.
All right. Well, I'm sure these dialogues are going to be fascinating as they move.
Yeah. Is definitely relevant to this conversation as well. So this is another process that is ongoing, will be rendering results, all very actionable. I'm pretty confident that they will be very actionable by the end of the year or a little bit after the New Year's. But this is an ongoing process that
your chair ends up this year. Your chair finishes this year. She wants them actionable before she's done. Just saying. I've talked to the manager, and that's on the, what we're going to do about the logos and the symbols, at least getting to a process. And I believe the police policy group, procedures group that's reviewing that, I think they're going to have a report out as well before the end of the year, I believe. And that will inform the search for the police chief.
Okay, well, we are going to take a short break now. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the neighborhood's form-based code on Columbia Pike and what that means for affordable housing. We'll be right back. Welcome back to County Board Wrap-Up, our look at some of the key decisions the board has taken this month and how they impact you. Joining me today is County Board Chair Libby Garvey, as well as Board Member Takis Karantonis. Now, affordable housing remains a top priority for the county. Arlington continues to look for ways to preserve the affordable housing that we have and encourage development of more affordable units. Now, in October, the board discussed a controversial staff proposal to increase the income limits for families and for individuals seeking to qualify for affordable housing, specifically in developments under Columbia Pike's form-based code. Now, for those viewers who aren't familiar with the form-based code, what is it and why is it used along Columbia Pike? Takis, I'm going to throw it to you.
Yeah, Takis has been busy with the Pike for many, many years.
That's true. And I can attempt to provide you with a short explanation what the form-based code is. The form-based code is actually a zoning layer. It's a zoning ordinance that prescribes how the siting, the size, the massing, the orientation of buildings that we have entitled to be built along a major transportation corridor, and the second most populous corridor in Arlington County, which is Columbia Pike. Columbia Pike was the test field for form-based code. This has been used in other places in the United States of America. And I have to say, the form-based code is not primarily about affordable housing. It is a zoning code about how we build our town. Now, on top of that, we can apply and insert other policies that aligned with our goals in other places, like, for example, housing affordability. And I would always use this term instead of only affordable housing, because one of the explicit goals is to create or to allow to be created housing that is appealing in different price levels to different strata of our society, from the lowest to the middle to the highest. And that's hasn't happened always, especially along the Pike. So the form-based code provides these tools. Now, the specific proposal that, as you well put it, was controversial and continues to be controversial, is putting making support available to a certain type of households that earn. Initially, they earned 60% of the area median income. So 60% of that. These are households with moderate to low income, to put it, in understandable terms, to provide them support for home ownership, not for rental. Now, along Columbia Pike, we have have explicit policies, and that's also for the entire county, where we support rental at different levels. 60% is a very common, AMI standard. 80% is another one. But for homeownership, which is a more difficult to attain, but more stable and more investment intensive policy, we had also the same 60% AMI standard. And the expectation was, and continues to be, that we will be able to enable families and individuals, but mostly families, to be able to find homes that will be affordable for them to buy with our public dollar support. So increasing these levels could, under circumstances that are not so far-fetched, could actually displace people. So could make it more difficult for these families to find anything, the families that we committed initially to support, to find anything to buy or to establish themselves as homeowners in Arlington County. And instead it would, shift the support to families with slightly higher or even considerably higher income. That was the point of the controversy. And I believe that the community came out, analyzed it correctly. We had a lot of time to discuss that, and we found out, I believe, and maybe our chair can also weigh in this, we found out that this is still not prime time ready. We have to think more carefully about all the policies that need to be in place in order to absolutely avoid unintended consequences, which would be, in this case, the displacement on 60% AMI households that still exist and live along Columbia Pike, as they also exist and live in other places in Arlington County, but we have a significantly number along Columbia Pike. So for now, the board has decided to defer this item, this policy proposal, indefinitely, which means that staff, the board, the community, our advisory commissions will need to go back to the drawing board and analyze it better and make sure that we don't have the unintended consequences that I just talked about.
So that was too long. A slight difference of opinion in that I'm not totally sure that the staff analyzed it wrong. But clearly there was a lot of upset and concern about the unintended consequences you mentioned, Taka. So I think that's important. I totally assume that it's going to be brought into the affordable housing master plan work that we're doing now. And that's a very, it's a very appropriate place for it. We're running up against, we're running up against some realities. I think the goals of everybody are the same. I think there were differences of opinion on how to actually implement those goals and whether it's going to work up. And I think we did absolutely right to take a pause. But what we found was that people at 60% of AMI, and there's another Carver Homes area where people of that level have been able to buy homes. Almost all of them are not making it financially and are about to may lose their homes because what what staff was sort of trying to say is if you're at 60% of AMI, you just can't afford to buy a home. So if you're at 80%, you maybe can make it. So I think what we're going to have to do, and this is the conversation we're going to need to have as a community, does the county put in enough income to make people at 60%, essentially 80%? And is that kind of support? We could do that maybe for a certain, for projects, a project here, project there, but is that a policy? How costly is that policy to make sure that people at 60% actually get the support to bring them up to 80%? That's a lot of income support. There may be other ways of doing support. I'd like us to look at something like co-op housing. I think there's some other things to look at. So that can get folded in here, but this is just a thorny issue. And it's
very complicated.
It's very complicated. And I think the one city that I hear of that has kind of solved affordable housing, a popular city, is Vienna, Austria. And that's because the city of Vienna owns almost all the housing in the city. Almost everybody lives in subsidized housing. And I was visiting a friend over there, certainly, upper middle class, well off, living in a delightful place. It was owned by the city of Vienna, and she can have it till she dies, but it's not hers. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
so it's a huge difference. Excuse me?
I actually used to work in the city of Vienna at some point in my life. In my paycheck, I was paying 0.5% of a housing authority, not a housing authority tax, of a public housing, social housing tax. This is one of the oldest income taxation percentages in the state of Austria. It's almost 100 years old. And what this created is it created the acquisition power for the city and for a communal non-profit acquisition entity that actually bought up about 55 to 60% of the entire stock. Now, that said, and to ground us a little bit.
Yeah, we need to get back to Arlington because I'm talking about this too.
In Vienna, 75% of the population are renters. 75% live in rented property. Only 1/3 of the entire housing stock of the city is actually private property, and it's occupied as such.
So it's a very different system and a different history, which just gets into the complexity, and this is not simple to solve, but we're going to be talking about it some more.
I was just going to say that this is obviously not an issue that will be tied up with a nifty little red bow anytime soon. So I'm sure we'll be talking about it much, much more in the future. But turning now to the coronavirus pandemic, and actually a little bit of good news, the county did receive some additional federal and state funding for COVID-19 relief. Now, what does this mean for Arlington? How will these funds be used?
It helps us keep people in their homes. Actually, it just follow on totally from the topic we had before. So one of the issues, we got a $2.2 million from HUD, Housing and Urban Development, and so we have people in HUD supported housing. I think we're often called Section 8. I think it's not quite Section 8, it's something else, but that's basically what we call it. And what it is, they get money from the federal government to help them stay in that housing. So, but those people pay something from their paychecks. Well, a lot of those folks, the most vulnerable, as we Taka's talked about earlier, those are the ones losing their jobs. And so they may not have paid much towards the rent, but now they have nothing to pay towards the rent, or almost nothing to pay towards the rent. We cannot have those people going out on the street. So this federal money is to help those folks stay in their homes and meet that difference in the rent that they're not able to cover right now. And it's very welcome. I think when we discussed closeout at our meeting, the manager said, when I think we're all there, our focus really right now is keeping people in their homes and making sure people have enough to eat, and getting health care as well, and then of course getting schools back in. So there's but at the top is keeping people in their homes, and we've just got to be able to do this. And this $2.2 million from the federal government was really very welcome. And then there was another, there was more money that came that we are distributing through 7 nonprofits that applied through an application process, and we are using that's federal CARES money, and we are using that. Giving that to those organizations to distribute. As I said, they applied to do that and said what they're going to be spending it on. And again, it's keeping people in their homes and making sure people have enough to eat for the most part.
Well, we're going to end today appropriately with a look at the manager's closeout recommendations for fiscal year 2020 budget. Now, as many of you know, Arlington's fiscal year runs from July 1st through June 30th each year. And right now, the county's in the second quarter of the fiscal year 2021 budget. Now, this is the time of the year where the manager usually makes recommendations on how the board might allocate any money unspent from the 2020 fiscal year, which ended June 30th, 2020. Next month, the board will vote on those recommendations and will also give the manager guidance to start building the 2022 budget. Now, obviously, the budget projections from back in January, February went right out the window with everything, and the managers gave some recommendations back in, I believe it was April or May, but then came back again a few weeks ago with some new recommendations. So where are we now?
Okay, those went out the window too. Not exactly. But where we are, and it's so unusual. I think this is about my 25th budget. And generally when we're at this point, we're looking at carryover, and we've got some money, and we often put it into affordable housing. We often have some of it go forward for the next budget. I've never been in a situation like this where we're in the second quarter of this budget year and we're facing a $28 to $38 million budget gap. And we have to balance our budget. We cannot run on a deficit like the federal government. So we've got to close that. And of course, the longer you wait in a fiscal year to decide how to do it, the harder it is. You can't make it all up in the last couple of weeks. So we're looking at a lot of things, but one of them is using carryout. So the manager recommended the major chunk of it to go to closing that gap. And then the rest of it, about another $6 million, going into reserves that could be used to help close gaps or to help handle things next year or things that come up, because hopefully we're going to get some federal funding to help us out. I think we will. It's a big question of how much it'll be and when it will be. And we've got to be able to have funds to kind of get our way through that. So talk, as I've said to you before, this is your first budget. They're not usually like this.
No, but it's really a tough situation. It's absolutely understandable why, right? COVID has really affected the budget, affected the our confidence in getting the tax revenue that we counted with. Now, among all this relatively, gloomy news, there is also one good news. You got a piece of good news that, for example, residential property taxes have been coming in. They didn't break off. They came in at a very high percentage, like 97, 98%. That's good to start with. However, we still don't know what the commercial tax base will do, and we can easily extrapolate and expect that the commercial tax base will be affected. And then there are other revenues that are beyond taxation and smaller tax, like meals taxes and transient occupancy taxes. Our economy in many places hurts right now, so the government revenue is breaking off, and as our chair mentioned, the projected gap at the end of the year is somewhere between $27 and $38 million. So probably we'll land somewhere in the middle of that. Also, the manager did two things that are important to underscore. First, early in the process, the county administration, the manager, has tried to actually reduce costs. We have a hiring freeze, etc. This already yielded some results that gives us the possibility right now to still be able to steer that boat with some with some tranquility and not being completely in red alert mode. That was important, and I think that was successful until now. The second thing that he did is he put in his proposal some contingency funding for everything that COVID will still be throwing at us. And given the fact that the federal government has been so incredibly unpredictable with forthcoming with help and support, and at the same time we have also our Arlington public school system, because which also is running a deficit. And we had yesterday a session with our colleagues from the Arlington County School Board for Arlington Public Schools. And we saw that, they can come by, but we have to think also about the next year. So I believe that we are now in a very cautious driven process, and we will be double checking and triple checking what we spend, how we spend it, and what implications this will have, not only to closing this budget, as the chair mentioned, this has to be balanced, but also next year's budget. For everybody out there, our citizens, this means that we invite them to really look at this, to really express their priorities, taking into account all the stressors that we have right now in the system. This is a very different conversations that we had in normal years without COVID.
And then what is the outlook? Obviously, there's going to be some belt tightening, the proverbial belt tightening to close out 2020 for the rest of fiscal year 2021. Then what is our outlook for fiscal year 2022? I realize nobody has a crystal ball in front of them to see how long the pandemic related revenues will be down. But are you anticipating another kind of rough budget year?
Yes. In a word, I don't know how much time we have here. Yes. I mean, we're anticipating we should start to get to a slow recovery. Hopefully we'll get a vaccine, but it's going to be a long time getting out of this this kind of hole that we're in. So, the good news is, it's not as bad as it could be. It's pretty bad, but it could be a lot worse. We're actually in okay shape. I find myself worrying a lot about other places in this country where they have the same kinds of challenges and don't have the same resources. And we have been, as Takas mentioned, we're being very cautious, and that's good. And we need to be planning for next year and knowing that we need some reserves and some contingencies because we're not sure what that year is going to bring. We do think it's going to get better, but slowly. It's not like we're going to just jump out of this. Some businesses probably will never come back. And then there are people who are going to continue long-term, maybe dealing with some unemployment. I mean, there's a lot of unknowns out there, and a lot of issues that we need to be prepared for. So I think all in all, we're in a good spot given the situation we're in. But it's not going to be easy, and we're not going to go back to normal for quite some time.
Yeah, and this is also an invitation to revisit our priorities and put the money where our speech is, right? So and there is real value in supporting right now the most vulnerable Arlingtonians. We talked a lot about this in this wrap-up conversation. These are all this money, all this support means also making these households more resilient. The support we provide to small businesses, yes, some will fold. Unfortunately, they will, but we will try to avoid that. So we will save several ones that otherwise, without the support, would fold. So all this is accumulated capital that will pay off later when we will be starting to get out of this situation. Plus, this shows again that the earlier we commit to a diversified economy, to we solve our issues with equity, liabilities, etc., the more resilient we are, and that pays off. And when we have stressful years like the one that we have this year and the one that we will see coming next year, so we are all in this. We are all in this really together, and that means that we invite everybody to work with us to have a budget that really works under the circumstances we are.
All right.
So thank you, Kara. We'll see where we get.
All right. Well, on that note, that will bring us to the end of this month's County Board Wrap-Up. Libby, Takas, thank you both very much for joining us today. Please join us again next month for another discussion with the County Board members of some of the key decisions they'll be making at the November meeting. Till then, stay safe. And remember to vote. I was going
to say vote. Everybody vote.